A Lexus versus a Toyota. Why would you compare a luxury SUV to a utilitarian, everyday SUV? Well, for starters, they share a lot more in common than what you might think. And the Lexus can actually be more affordable than the 4Runner in some situations. In this video, I'm going to share some of our thoughts on the good, the bad, the pros, and the cons on both of these platforms after over 250,000 miles of travel. So whether you're looking for a reliable daily commuter or a tough as nails overland build platform, and you're trying to decide between a GX460 and a 5th gen 4Runner, then this video is for you. But first, in the name of brand recognition and algorithms, let's roll that short, sweet intro. Howdy folks, I'm Kevin with Lifestyle Overland, and this channel is usually dedicated to videos documenting our overland travels all across North America with my wife Sarah, daughter Caroline, and newest member of the family, Abigail. But today, I'm here in the garage to finally answer our most asked question and share our thoughts on what must be probably one of the longest running comparative tests between the 4Runner and GX platforms. So to kick things off, let's introduce to you our test subjects, though they're more like family members than machines now. Say hello to Silver and Aspen. Silver is a 2014 Trail Edition 4Runner, which is now known as the TRD Pro Off-Road, which we purchased brand new in 2014. And as of this filming, we're currently showing 197,370 miles on her old ticker. Then you got Aspen, who is our 2016 Lexus GX460 that we bought in 2019 as a Lexus certified used unit with 52,000 miles on the odometer. Today, she now reads 115,434, which, if you're keeping score, means 63,434 miles are our own. And doing some quick math, that's combined 260,804 miles of travel in these rigs. And since we've been doing this YouTuber, overland, storyteller thing full-time since 2018, more than 50% of those miles traveled have been off-road. That's over 130,000 miles of dirt, rock, gravel, mud, sand, and snow. But wait, there's more. 90% of those off-road miles were towing a fully loaded expedition trailer. So needless to say, we've put these incredible machines through some rigorous testing and probably downright abusive situations over the years. I think that's what the engineers call severe use case. So, if you've been looking for someone with a ton of real-world use in both these platforms to give their unbiased opinion on each, you found us. Now, buckle up and let's get into the nitty-gritty comparisons between the 4Runner and the GX. Now, for the skeptics out there, let's just start with the biggest thing. One of the most interesting on-paper facts about these rides is their depreciation rates. And while supply and demand have probably changed these numbers slightly as more and more people discover the GX value, they currently have a 40% 5-year depreciation rate, where the 4Runner only sees about a 25% depreciation in its first 5 years. If you've been shopping around, you probably know by now it's not uncommon to see used 4Runners selling for at nearly new MSRP prices, while the GX460 takes a much heavier hit as soon as it drives off the lot, making it an enticing option, especially around that 5 or 6 year old mark. All right, so let's start with the footprint and a few basic specs that you might not be aware of. The size comparison on these two are almost identical, with both their stock lengths coming in at about 190 inches. The GX is slightly narrower at 74 inches, and the 4Runner measures in at 76 inches. The wheelbase is also identical at 110 inches, but this isn't surprising considering that they share very similar chassis and suspension components. The only place you're really going to feel a size difference is the interior, where the GX has a bit more legroom in the back, which means that your taller passengers in the back will be a little bit more comfortable, or you can use the power seats to make more space up front. Though, be forewarned that as we recently discovered that with its sloping seat back, shoehorning a rear-facing car seat means that you'll be eating the steering wheel. The good news is, they grow out of it. Now, strangely enough, even though with a similar chassis and nearly identical suspension, the 4Runner wins big with a turning radius of 37.4 feet, where the GX creeps out to 41.1. That's almost a 4-foot difference. But to be honest, it's not a difference that we have actually felt in real life. They actually feel very similar on road and on trail. Now for our off-road enthusiasts, this is where the GX460 starts to get a bit disheartening. And that's the 21 and 23 degree approach and departure angles. Now, while this might not be an issue for those who are planning on a quick aftermarket bumper upgrade, in its stock configuration, there's some extra work needed to get the GX's sexy skirts hiked up high enough to overcome obstacles without inadvertently rearranging the plastic wear. Now, this is nothing a cutoff wheel or reciprocating saw can't make short work of, if you're not opposed to hacking on your new ride. Now the 4Runner on the other hand does a great job right out of the box with about 33 degrees of approach and 26 degrees of departure. So as long as you have her shoed with some quality tires, you'll be hitting the trails in no time and taking on a few moderate obstacles without any tedious trim work. Now the curb weight on these models varies depending on your options, obviously. But the 4Runner weighs in at around 4,700 pounds, where the GX is a bit chunkier at 5,200 pounds. This is partly due to the V8 power plant, chunks of luxury, and if rumors are true, a slightly thicker chassis. For our Overland rig builders out there who believe that the GVWR, or gross vehicle weight rating, is more than a guideline or suggested final weight, then the 4Runner gives you about 6,200 pounds of total loadout capacity, whereas the GX offers around 6,600 depending on the factory options. That's about another 1,500 pounds of passengers and gear for the 4Runner and 1,400 pounds for the GX. And now we come to one of the biggest differences between the rigs, the parts that make it go vroom vroom. The 4Runner is fitted with a 4.0 V6 known as the 1GRFE, cranking out a peak 270 horsepower at 5,600 RPMs and 278 foot-pounds of torque at around 4,400 RPMs. In its stock trim, this is a respectable, fuel-efficient SUV that's just perfect for zipping the family around town or across the country. But when you start adding bigger tires and armor and all the overlandy bits, you'll start to feel a difference in performance. If you're someone who's coming from a background of driving big V8 SUVs or trucks, then you might begin to wonder if the 4Runner is about to explode when pulling a long hill or fighting a 50-mile-per-hour headwind out west, because it will want to run at 4,000 plus RPMs during a hard pull. Now the good news is it won't blow up. In fact, it's quite happy to do this all day long for 200,000 plus miles. And we know this because we've tested this theory for 9 years now, and our conclusion is that Toyota, they knew exactly what they were about when they designed this engine. Just slip it into sport mode so it doesn't hunt between gears, turn up the music, and enjoy the ride. However, in the other corner, we have the GX with its snooty 1URFE 4.6 liter V8, turning up its nose at the 4Runner with 301 horses at 5,500 RPMs and 329 foot-pounds of torque, peaking at a much more pleasant 3,500 RPMs. And for those of you keeping score, that's 31 more horsepower and 59 more foot-pounds of torque, which on paper isn't a huge improvement until you consider the GX's secret weapon, a 6-speed transmission. I don't know why, but having this perfectly calculated transmission divvying out slightly more power in 6 steps, it just makes driving the GX in demanding situations a lot more enjoyable. Now to be fair, the 4Runner with its bulletproof 5-speed transmission gets the job done, but having that low rumble and roar of the V8, it just makes you think it's doing it all with a lot less effort. But I come from the big V8 crowd, so this might not be on your radar. Just don't ever borrow your uncle's 6.2 Denali and you'll be fine. Ignorance is bliss. So out of curiosity, while prepping my notes for this video, I decided to check the average 0 to 60 comparisons of these platforms in their stock configurations, and surprisingly, the 4Runner comes in at around 7.6 seconds, with the GX barely a chin hair faster at 7.5 seconds. In the quarter mile, again, almost identical numbers at 15.7 and 15.8. However, the engineers must have an opinion on the difference in power, because the tow rating for the 4Runner is 5,000 pounds, whereas the GX jumps up another 1,500 pounds to a healthy 6,500. So it would seem the engineers agree, the heavier you are, the more advantageous the GX will be. Now, if that V8 just sealed the deal for you, let me rain on your parade to the dealership for just a second. There's a catch and a cost to all this extra power. The GX460 with its fancy V8, divine 6-speed, and pinkies up luxury package demands the finest of fermented dinosaurs in the form of 91 octane premium fuel. Now, you could be like a few cavalier internet personalities that I've come across and slip her the cheap drinks. But don't be surprised if over time, her sexy burble develops a raspy knock. And if you thought she was high maintenance then, now we're talking surgery. Anyhow, I digress. With both platforms getting similar factory trim fuel mileage with 0 modifications, you'll just have to decide if you prefer a lighter wallet in a GX or a louder hill climb in the 4Runner. If you're planning on some weighty additions, we found that in the real world usage, the GX does better on-road with heavier loads and towing than the 4Runner does by about 1.5 miles per gallon. So it seems there are indeed benefits to the V8 and 6-speed beyond driver experience. However, on slower trails, the roles reverse as the V8 lumbers along, sucking up more fuel than the V6 4Runner. So at the end of the day, we don't see fuel mileage being a deciding factor for the off-road enthusiast. So all this chatter about engines and fuel mileage just really comes down to driver preference. And again, for those of you keeping score, I think we do prefer that V8 driver experience. One of the most impressive features found in the 4Runner and the GX is their built-in traction control. And while traction control might not be high on the list for a casual user who doesn't have to deal with snow or off-road conditions, if you ever need it, you'll be really glad that you have it. And when it comes to drivetrains, the GX only has one option, and that is all-wheel drive, though it does include high range and low range. The 4Runner, though, is available in 2-wheel drive, full-wheel drive, and full-time all-wheel drive. Our 4Runner Silver has 4-wheel drive, which means it can be manually switched from 2-wheel drive to 4-wheel drive high to 4-wheel drive low. While I have come across some folks who really think that the GX's all-wheel drive system feels a lot more sportier and in control on the road, we, on the other hand, actually wish that we had the ability to switch it to 2-wheel drive. Oftentimes during casual driving, the all-wheel drive system will catch uneven road surfaces and drift a bit, forcing you to constantly correct and recorrect its trajectory. Under hard acceleration, when turning, there can be a lot of power steer, which puts a lot of feedback into the steering wheel. And let me tell you, you better have both hands on the thing because it can happen unexpectedly and you'll find yourself a little bit off course. Now, to be honest, this is a first world problem. It's not as bad as what we make it out to be, but if we're talking about preferences, this is one of our pet peeves. Now, on the other hand, on-road driving with the 4Runner and 2-wheel drive, it's just straight up predictable. And overall, it's just a much easier driver experience because you're not fighting the front drive line during traffic maneuvers. Usually, if we have a long drive or we expect a lot of traffic in front of us, then we're going to prefer to do it in the 4Runner. But when rubber meets dirt, both the GX and the 4Runner are phenomenal performers, so long as you have some proper quality tires underneath them. It's no secret that Toyota and Lexus have some of the best traction control systems in the world, in our humble opinion. And while the basic traction algorithm is active all the time, along with vehicle stability on the 4Runner and GX, there are some options available to help fine-tune the system for specific off-road challenges. Now, without getting too deep into the weeds on this subject, the GX is equipped with track and A-track standard from the factory. Track is basically a limited slip control of the differentials when it's in 4-wheel high, and A-track is a brake locking system that's activated when you switch to 4-low. Now, on a very few GX460s out there, you can also get the MTS or multi-terrain select option along with crawl control. And basically what MTS does for you is it gives you finer control over how the A-track system behaves. For example, if you're in some mud, you want to maintain some wheel spin to keep the treads clear and momentum up, so it backs off on the use of brakes to redirect power. If you're climbing up some rock, it's going to respond to a slip much faster and use the brakes to stop that wheel from spinning while redirecting power to the tire that has some traction. The crawl control option takes this one step further and eliminates driver throttle input by acting as a very low-speed cruise control system. You simply turn it on, select your speed, and let off the brake as the system applies throttle and moves you through an obstacle with the best traction possible. Now, A-track, multi-terrain select, and crawl control are also options in the 4Runner, but they're a lot easier to find in things like the Trail Edition, TRD Off-Road, and TRD Pros. Now, if you absolutely have to have MTS and crawl control in your GX, it's not a deal breaker. The good news is you can actually add this option in yourself later on. All you got to do is buy the module and the switches, pull some panels off, slide everything into place, perform what they call a zero calibration on your system, and off you go. I actually did this mod to our GX right here, and let me tell you how many times I used it. 0. Because for some reason, the weight balance on the GX and the built-in A-track is just unreal. So far, we just haven't found an obstacle that it can't handle. And in fact, I've had some situations where when I was in the 4Runner, I had to engage lockers to get through it, whereas the GX just crawled right on through. Now, to be fair, I think the difference is that the weight balance on the GX is a lot better. There's equal weight on the front and the rear axle, whereas our 4Runner, she got a thick booty. All her weight's back in the back, and so it can make climbing over some obstacles just a touch more difficult. And then speaking of lockers, the only locker available from the factory in the GX460 is the center locking differential. Now, again, I'm going to avoid the weeds here, but that basically means that when your center locker is engaged, the front and rear axles will receive the same amount of power as opposed to sending it to one that is free spinning. Because chances are, if your front tires are spinning and your rear tires have traction, all they need is a little bit of power to get you out of a situation. The 4Runner has an optional factory E-locker, which when engaged ensures that both the right and left tires are spinning together and sharing the power instead of just one free spinning. And that's about as fast and simple as I can explain these lockers today. Sadly, there are no factory front lockers available for the 4Runner from the factory, but we happen to have an ARB aftermarket front locker in Old Silver here, and let me tell you, we hardly ever use it. So the fact that they don't offer one is far from being a deal breaker. And I know I'm going to get this question, so I'm going to go ahead and answer it now. Yes, both of these platforms perform exceptionally well in the snow. Just make sure you have the right tires on to ensure that you're going to have the traction that they're willing to give you. For the past 2 winters, I've made several trips over some of the high passes here in Utah in the middle of some snowstorms, and I haven't seen the first slip or slide, so truly phenomenal. So when it comes to traction, I think both of these platforms are incredible. And if I had to pick one as a favorite, it'd be pretty difficult to choose. Though honestly, I think I prefer the more manual feel of the 4Runner personally, just because I prefer to use lockers and momentum over some of the smart traction devices that honestly can make a heck of a lot of strange noises as they're working their way through an obstacle. Though, if I had to quiz Sarah, I think that she would probably prefer pushing a button and letting the system do its job without having to send it. She's definitely a fan of the more controlled process, but to each their own. On to suspension, the components that straighten the curves and flatten the hills. This one's pretty easy. On the GX, you've got one option, and that is the KDSS, or Kinetic Dynamic Suspension System. So these fancy terms basically mean that when you're going real fast, it tightens a piston that's connected to the sway bar, making the whole suspension more rigid for taking curves and avoiding that body roll. Now, when you slow down on a trail and need all kinds of flexibility to walk over obstacles, it relieves the pressure on that piston, which allows the sway bar to move freely, which in turn lets your wheels travel further and improve your flex. Generally speaking, this means that you're not working so hard against a rigid suspension that wants to raise corners of the rig or lift a wheel, which cause you to lose traction. Now, it doesn't take too deep of an internet search to find that there are some people who love it and some people who hate it. Personally, I think it's ingenious. I don't have a problem with it myself, but compared to the 4Runner, which came with the standard suspension and the static sway bars, I haven't found a huge difference between the two systems off-road. But I think it's worth noting that on-road and in their stock factory configurations, our non-KDSS 4Runner just had terrible nosedive and body roll, so we definitely saw an advantage with the KDSS system later when we got to try it on the GX. So if you plan to upgrade your suspension for off-road travel, you'll see a huge improvement both on and off-road with a properly sprung and valve suspension. But if you're one of the ones that's just only out for a comfortable commuter, then the KDSS system is a must. If you're looking for an off-road ready, out-of-the-box option, the TRD Pro 4Runner gives you the option of an upgraded suspension featuring Fox shocks and a mild lift of about 2 inches. Now, I'm only going to recommend this route if you don't plan on installing your own suspension at a later date, because you'll waste a ton of cash on the TRD Pro label that could otherwise go towards some quality King, Fox, or Rad flows later on down the road. So now let's talk about the elephant in the room, because you can't compare a Lexus to a Toyota without talking about the glaring differences between one vehicle that was designed to luxuriously transport a white slacked baby boomer to the country club, and another that was built for the utilitarian activity of a parent driving 2 kids in Capri Sun stained car seats to Costco for cheap diapers and a $1.50 hot dog combo. All stereotypes and comedic attempts aside, we've spent a lot of time in each of these rides in a lot of different situations. We have a few opinions on what we like and dislike. For starters, we're usually simple folks who appreciate utility and functionality, so fancy gadgets and comforts, they don't impress us much, especially if they're cumbersome. For example, we love the tactile feel and immediate response of knobs and real buttons, and so the touchscreen radio and climate controls on our GX drove us crazy with their lag time and just difficulty to use when bouncing down a trail. Now, sadly, there aren't many replacement options for the radio in the GX, and this Chinese Tesla-style replacement was maybe more of a step backwards and hasn't been much of an improvement overall. The dials and knobs in our 4Runner are programmed into our muscle memory, so we can basically adjust temperatures on the fly without even looking down. We did end up replacing the factory 4Runner radio for something with CarPlay and Android Auto compatibility, but at least there were better options like this quality Alpine unit instead of a questionable and unreliable Chinese upgrade. And speaking of ergonomics, whoever designed the interior of the 4Runner clearly mocked one up in real life and sat in it, where the engineer who designed the GX interior probably only played with it on a computer screen. And I say that because the window and lock buttons are out of the way. It forces you to reach around the door handle, and it's just weird. The cup holders are in the way of the shifter and buttons in the console, so if you're running with a big gulp, you'll have to arch your wrist to select 4 low or shift into gear. And when you pull a cup from the cup holder, you get a loud clang confirming the release of the drink receptacle. And if you're tall like me, the entry can feel a bit awkward with that sweeping door frame, which is really fun when you're having some back issues. And if you're looking for charge ports in the GX, they're real easy to find because there's only one. I mean, come on. This is 2016. I don't know what they were thinking. So if your kids need tablets to travel with, then you're probably going to want to bring some battery packs or get some extra charge ports installed ASAP. The interior of the 4Runner, on the other hand, is just much more thoughtfully laid out. The drinks are to the side of the shifter, the windows and locks are in a natural location. It's like they anticipated our first world problems and said, yes, we know, and you're welcome. It's almost as if it was a little apology for not giving us a V8 option. As to the seats, while the heated and cooled option in the GX is a nice addition to help with the lava-like surface in the summer and Arctic-like posterior conditions in the winter, we've actually loved the cloth seats in the 4Runner, which up until the last probably 10,000 miles or so had avoided any signs of wear or tear. But apparently last year's Thanksgiving and Christmas were just the straw that broke the camel's back, and the added weight was finally too much for the 4Runner's fabric. Good job, driver's seat. You served me well. And then there's the sound deadening. The Lexus is probably 50% quieter than the 4Runner when you're talking about road noise on long drives. But our choice in aftermarket exhaust have pretty much nullified anything close to quiet drive. Apparently, we like to hear our trusty steeds sing the song of their people. When it comes to cargo space, that ship has kind of sailed for us personally, but the available third row seats in the 4Runner and standard third row seats in the GX are really handy when you have some tiny kids or small people who don't mind climbing in and out of that back area. But removed, You have a decent sized space for all kinds of cargo or storage solutions depending on your end goals. I will say be careful about removing actual passenger seats before your childbearing years are over, because you never know when another kid will show up looking for a spot to ride. I guess these Overland builds never truly are done. Another big polarizing difference between the 4Runner and the GX is the rear. The 4Runner has a hatch that provides instant cover if it's raining or shade when it's 106. It has a glass that rolls down into the hatch for maximum ventilation, and it easily clears trailers even with a shorter tongue. The GX, on the other hand, has a massive barn door that opens from the side. Now, it does try to help with the glass being a hatch style, but it doesn't open while you're on the move, so there's no ventilation help. Off-road, the door just squeaks tremendously and it lets in quite a bit of dust on the rougher trails. And it's a pain when you have a trailer with a shorter tongue because you can't get the door all the way open. Now, the upside is they're great for using a 270-degree awning up on the roof rack. And there are some mods that make handy prep tables that drop down from the door itself, which is truly something you can't do with the 4Runner at all. Just something to think about. As far as maintenance goes, both platforms are comparable on routine items, and when it comes to reliability, neither one has ever left us stranded. I think some common weaknesses that we've identified for the 4Runner is the fact that the rear wheel bearings gave out a little bit sooner than what we had hoped. But again, to be fair, these were under very hard use conditions, and we were probably a little bit too much overweight across that rear axle. The good news is we were still 100% mobile when we were clued into their failing state, but they were incredibly expensive to have replaced due to the requirement of needing some special tools, so it wasn't something I could just easily do myself. I'm not sure about the composition of the GX's wiring loom, but I can tell you for a fact that the 4Runner wiring insulation is extremely tasty to New Mexico rats. One day we parked our 4Runner in the barn for probably just a few hours during a hailstorm, and when I went back out to start it up, the dash lit up like a Christmas tree. $3,000 later, we had a new wiring harness in. Thankfully, insurance did cover part of that. Now, as for the GX, it seems as if its weakest point is its front steering linkage, and again, internet search will confirm this too, but we had to replace the entire front steering rack roughly around 100,000 miles, which again was another painful pocketbook expense. And maybe this is a pet peeve, but we're also not very happy with how much dust the rear AC system likes to suck up and blow into the kids' faces back in the back. So we're probably going to be looking at some way to filter that system out just a little bit better as well. Now, just to cover another question that we get very often is, with all our towing, we still stuck with the factory transmission coolers, and honestly, we've never had any issues with excessive fluid temps. But due to the severe use that we put these vehicles through, we take whatever the recommended service interval is for changing the fluid in the transmission and cut it in half. That way we ensure that we're getting that fluid refreshed at a regular interval, because harder use makes that breakdown faster, and so you just replace it sooner. It's a pretty simple evolution. All right, to sum it all up, 4Runners have better ergonomic and tactile feel inside. GX460s bring a ton of luxury and comforts. 4Runners have way more mods available for the off-roader and the builder. GX460s usually have a price advantage over 4Runners of the same make, year, model, and mileage. The 4Runner out-of-box capabilities makes it easy to get started, but then the GX power and performance win in the driver experience department certainly makes it a tempting option. So after 250,000 miles of testing both, we've decided that neither one is perfect for every person or situation, but they each shine in their own ways. Really, it just comes down to your preferences and which areas are most important to you. I think personally, I find myself gravitating towards the 4Runner because I like to feel more connected to the trail, and everything just feels more familiar and ergonomic inside. Whereas my wife, Sarah, on the other hand, she loves the GX because of the luxury and, let's face it, V8 power, baby. But honestly, it's all a very close race because we've loved all the experiences that we've enjoyed in both of them. And any annoyances like we've talked about are all very minor. So which one is your favorite? Comment down below, or if you think we missed something, feel free to chime in. If you want to see our builds laid out in detail, then go to lso.link/Aspen for the GX build with build sheets and videos, or go to lso.link/silver for our 4Runner build sheet, videos, and all that fun stuff. Hey, this has been a great talk. I hope that you found it informative. I hope that if you're trying to decide between these two platforms, that it helped highlight some areas that'll allow you to make that decision. And as always, remember, stay curious and leave it better than you found it.